Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to respond to the question from the Honorable Gioni Barabi. Mr. Speaker, as Honorable Gioni Barabi knows, the transfer of indigenous ecological knowledge is a complex process that requires deep collaboration with other communities. But it is worth the effort because it protects heritage with those entrusted by history with carrying its legacy forward. And it, of course, it informs my government's campaign to address the biodiversity crisis that faces the planet. Section 40 of the Constitution, the Fijian Constitution, Mr. Speaker, says that every person has the right to a clean and healthy environment, which of course includes the right to have the natural world protected for the benefit of present and future generations through legislative and other measures. And Fiji is meeting that constitutional mandate by leading by example in working with nature and not against it. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that solutions to protecting the natural world do not always come encased in steel and concrete. They come from nature itself. And we recognize that we are not the first generation to wrestle with this challenge. Often the answers to the most difficult questions we face can come from tapping indigenous ecological knowledge, what we call I-E-K. This knowledge, Mr. Speaker, can benefit every community in Fiji, and that is why we are wielding it through a whole-of-government effort. Upholding the aims of the Fijian Constitution is not the duty of a single ministry. It is the mandate of every arm of government. Honourable Speaker, look, for example, at our COVID-19 response. It is led by the Minister of Health and Medical Services, but every ministry, Mr. Speaker, is enlisted in this national effort, and that is why we are succeeding. While the Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs is primarily responsible for documenting I-E-K, this is also a government-wide program. Indeed, it is a society-wide program built through partnerships with NGOs and the private sector. So I will not confine my response today to the Ministry's work, and instead will speak more broadly about how I-E-K fits with our larger commitment to keep Fiji's environment pristine. Honourable Speaker, resource owners play a vital role in the use of I-E-K for environment management. That is why we have set up a National I-Taukei Resource Owners Committee, a subcommittee of the National Environment Council under the Environment Management Act. And carriage of that act, of course, rests with the Ministry of Environment. That is why the Council's budget allocation is with the Ministry of Environment. That is intentional, because resource owners and the traditional ecological knowledge can have a countrywide impact on ecological conservation through the Ministry of Environment. In this way, indigenous knowledge and practices can be mainstreamed, can be learned, transferred, and adopted. Indeed, that knowledge, Mr. Speaker, can have a global impact, because we are a leading nation. The world watches what Fiji is doing, and when we pioneer innovative solutions, we serve more than Fiji. We create an example that serves the planet. Mr. Speaker, it was my government that published a climate change glossary in the Taukei language, the first vernacular climate change glossary. The value of glossary that lies in more than labeling the climate threats upon us. It allows us to translate ancient wisdom to meet modern challenge. And that, Honourable Speaker, is what we are doing. At the policy level, Fiji ratified the 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, or the Convention, in 2010. My government recognizes that we need to harness indigenous ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge to address broader development issues such as environmental management. Fragments of work had existed. But we had to bring them together through a systematic arrangement. The convention provided this umbrella. The 7-year window between 2003 and 2010 proved our intervention's importance in leveraging other mechanisms to address Fiji's national development. Mr. Speaker, the convention provided a pathway to connect the intangible and the tangible. Government recognized that IEK and traditional knowledge would flow into the public domain and be easily accessed and used by policymakers, including government ministries. This would further our work to address climate change, manage disaster risk reduction, and protect biological diversity. The Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Convention Biological Diversity all recognize, Mr. Speaker, the role of traditional knowledge. So we must build this body of information and make it accessible so that it can be used to further sustainable and resilient development. At the program level, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs implements a cultural mapping program, what we call the CMP, which identifies knowledge systems and processes and mitigates their loss through recording. The program records traditional knowledge, including IEK, and the Ministry has shared snippets of it with the owner's approval. The first phase of the CMP, which is the data collection from the 14 provinces, has been completed. Currently, data is being verified and cleaned and will be stored in the Traditional Knowledge and Expression of Culture database. The database will be a depository of knowledge and information and will morph into a registry. This is the critical component of the Traditional Knowledge and Expression of Culture Bill, the TKEC Bill, which will be put to Parliament soon. Mr. Speaker, traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression are very specific areas of intellectual property law. The Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs is currently working with the Attorney General's Chambers on a TKEC bill, a specific law that covers traditional knowledge. As already mentioned by the Attorney General when we were debating the intellectual property laws that were Patents Act 2021, Trademark Act 2021 and the Designers Act 2021, we intend to introduce the TKEC bill in Parliament soon, but we are trying our best to get it right first. The TKEC bill provides for the registration, the ownership, and protection of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression. To provide the protection, we must first be able to identify which design, artwork, and traditional knowledge belong to which subset of the I-Taukei community. This is not an easy task, Mr. Speaker, nor should it be easy if we want to get it right. I-Taukei people have interacted and shared traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions and designs across our long history. Much of the I-Taukei culture and history is oral. At times, the lack of a written record makes it unclear who owns what and where a particular design originates. We are doing our best and we are making progress. There is great potential for overlaps depending on how the extent that different subcommittees have historically interacted. The Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs has over the years undertaken a nationwide exercise on cultural mapping to be able to transcribe, file, and compile an accurate record of I-Taukei traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression. The exercise, Mr. Speaker, is yet to be finalized. After the cultural mapping exercise, a registry will be set up under the Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs to protect traditional knowledge and cultural expression. Until the cultural mapping exercise is complete, and the registry is set up, the bill, even if implemented now, will not be effective. Owners and designers of traditional knowledge and cultural expression, traditional cultural expression will first need to be established before action can be taken against unlawfully using that traditional cultural knowledge or traditional cultural expression. But once it is set up, Mr. Speaker, it will provide a legal recourse for traditional communities to claim against a person, a company or institution they feel is misusing their designs, traditional totems or traditional knowledge. Apart from the CMP, the Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs undertakes the Special Revival Program and the Cultural Awareness Program. The Ministry visits villages and communities to revive and document traditional practices, including IEK. In the recent past, the Ministry visited Ndakuimbanga in Benga, Nambutotau in Nabosa, Natauloa in Nairai, Moa in I-Taukei in Fulanga, Namatakula in Nandronga, Tonge in Ba, Navatuewu in Serua, Natalera in Daosamu, and Wisoto in Obalau, to document some of these practices. Knowledge is drawn from living human treasures and is documented and stored for future use, if not transmitted. The I-Taukei Affairs Board continues to use its conservation platform to promote best practices that will allow the communities to sustainably manage their natural resources now and for future generations. A conservation officer is now stationed in each provincial council office to assist the Yombulo communities in provincial, tikina and village levels. Some concrete outcomes include waste management, best practices at village levels, identifying traditional taboo sites, primarily for the preservation of the marine and forest reserve, the gazetting of Kiva Marine Reserve, for instance, and establishing Watuira Conservation Park. The I-Taukei Land Trust Board, Mr. Speaker, has also used IEK in its lease programs. Cost-sharing benefits are included in its conservation lease to protect the interest of landowners. A good example is the Survey Basin Conservation Lease. TLTB leases 24,000 hectares to the National Trust of Fiji to protect and preserve the environment. It is the biggest lease of its kind in the Pacific. The landowning units receive a good rental income through this arrangement. TLTB also works closely with the Fiji Museum under the I-Taukei Lands Trust Act and the Preservation of Objects of Archaeological and Paleontological Interest Act to protect heritage sites. It is done to protect heritage sites. From an IEK perspective, Mr. Speaker, it recognizes the need to protect I-Taukei cultural heritage. Mr. Speaker, education is an important tool in transferring this IEK to environment management. The Ministry of I-Taukei Affairs collaborates with Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts, and cultural stakeholders to strengthen the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage through the development of the National Intangible Cultural Heritage Framework. The National Intangible Cultural Heritage The workshop underlined the importance of protection and safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage and dissemination of information for sustainable practice at the national level through relevant projects. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry conducted an awareness workshop in Suva. The purpose was to raise awareness with cultural institutions and government and non-government organizations on the 2003 Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage Status in Fiji. Also, the Ministry of Education conducts safeguarding of ICH with minority communities. An example is the Department of Heritage and Arts Awareness Workshop with the Rutuma, Rambe, and Kiowa communities. The department provides a program to encourage Indigenous ecological knowledge of these communities to transfer Indigenous knowledge, sustainable practice through oral traditions, singing, showcasing the traditional dance sessions at the community level, encourage this important transfer of ecological knowledge. The Fiji National Museum, Mr. Speaker, has an educational program, virtual museum, and the National Museum Library with rich cultural history. That is very educational, that encourages the transfer of this knowledge through cultural, heritage, and publications, reports and research publications, archaeological reports and heritage impact assessment. The National Trust of Fiji, with its program, also encourages, in terms of encouraging the work of protection and safeguarding of the environment, and the Fiji Arts Council also provide workshops and programs that promote, safeguard, and protect traditional art and craft, performing arts, creative and literal arts. Mr. Speaker, as a country with vast stretches of coastline and many maritime communities, the ocean is our oyster. It is a source of food, culture and connection between our people. And this initiative fits in with our larger agenda to build a sustainable blue economy across Fiji. The Ministry of Fisheries has been engaging with NGOs and local communities to promote the sustainable use of our fisheries. Many traditional and customary rules and norms and IEK govern how our communities use natural resources sustainably. They include the use of tambours by chiefs and other elders. Example, to restrict fishing periods to allow for spawning to take place, as well as an ecosystem understanding in resource management reflected in ridge to reef or watershed-based land tenure. In Fiji, there are numerous examples of where informal systems contribute to the sustainable management of natural resources, including their conservation. Mr. Speaker, in summary, at the policy and program levels, the transfer of IEK and environment management goes through a robust process that is SDG-proof. My government is steadfast in our commitment to environmental management and protection. We have enforced laws on our books to punish those who illegally pillage the natural world. In line with this commitment, we will promote and enhance the use of internationally recognized legal regimes such as IEK under traditional knowledge. This also acknowledges the owners of IEK, which is the I-Taukei and Rutuman communities. Mr. Speaker, on that note, I understand the National Environment Council intends to set up a National Rutuman Resource Owners subcommittee at its next meeting. Mr. Speaker, the TKEC bill will further strengthen our work and we will introduce it in Parliament. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.